Hey guys, welcome back to another weekly market update and forecast. Now, I know many of you are at Matt's right now, and nope, I'm not jealous at all. I really hope to be able to join in next year, but we will see how things progress in the market. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I teach about the trucking industry with a heavy focus on the spot market as well as freight market analysis. So if this is a topic that interests you, feel free to subscribe down below. So the trucking market, well, what can I say? It seems to be a roller coaster of a ride that we are all stuck on and can't seem to get off. Let's go ahead and look at what happened this week in the market as well as what we can expect for next week. Ready? Let's go! As always, I start these videos by looking at the general picture. And for that, we're going to start with looking at the outbound tender volumes versus outbound tender rejections. Now, volumes tell us how much freight there is in the market. It's showing us the demand side of the supply and demand equation. The tender rejection index, which is in white right here, this shows us the supply side, and it shows us how many contract carriers are refusing from those contract loads, thereby sending them to the spot market. So let's take a look. Volumes in general, you can see there are ups and downs, but in general, they have been relatively stable from the beginning of the year, which is good. Now, in terms of tender rejections, as some of you guys might remember, I kept referencing February 15th as being the bottom. So February 15th was somewhere right here. This is the bottom. Unfortunately, we have officially gone below that. We are right here at the moment. And the tender rejection is at 3.22%, which means that only 3.22% of that contract freight is actually ending up on the spot market. And that, of course, means that spot market rates are pretty much in the gutter at the moment. Now, what I do want to do is I want to look at past patterns. I want to look at historical data because even though the current market is anything but normal, it still helps us understand what happened in the past and possibly get a hint of what might happen in the future. So right now we're looking at the same exact chart that we were looking at just a second ago, but this is over the past 5 years from 2018 all the way to 2023. And again, the white line shows us tender rejections, the blue line shows us volumes. Now inside of these green bars, it's showing us information from the beginning of March to the end of April. And what we can see in 2018, the volumes from the beginning of March to end of April decreased. Same thing in 2019. In 2020, the volumes decreased in March, but then started going up in April. In 2021, there was a decrease. In 2022, there was a decrease. And actually right now, it's abnormal. Volumes are staying relatively stable. Now, what about tender rejection rates? In 2018, rejection rates went down from beginning to end of March and then up in April. In 2019, they just went down. In 2020, they also went down and then started climbing back up. But April 2020 was when the shutdowns happened, right? So I don't know if that is quite reliable there. In 2021, the tender rejections went down in March and then kind of remained stable in April. And in 2022, yeah, we went down and we continued to go down, and this is where we are right now. Now, I'm going to attach these charts down below so you guys can see them better, but in general, what this shows us is that volumes as well as tender rejections do tend to go down from the beginning of March until the end of March. What happens in April still is unclear to me in terms of tender rejection rates. It seems like the volumes continue dropping until the end of April and start picking up in May, which is right after this green bar. You can see every year it picks up, but in terms of tender rejections, it's kind of mixed results. Okay, now to equipment-specific tender rejections and how much they have changed since last week. So blue is flatbed, green is van, and red or orange is reefer. And we can see that all three of them dropped from last week. The worst drop was for a flatbed. Tender rejections went down by 33.5%, which is it's pretty significant. Dry van tender rejections went down by 12.3% and reefers by 3.3%. So yeah, the rates are definitely currently on a downward trajectory. Now, something I have never shown is this chart right here, which shows the National Truckload Index for Linehaul only. It doesn't include fuel. This is a spot rate index based on the average of loads booked for dry vans. Why is it important? Because it shows us what is going on in the spot market. So what does it show us currently? Well, first of all, we can see that from the beginning of the year, it has been going down. It has kind of leveled off, but it's still going down. I mean, we're not going to beat around the bush here. Currently, the NTIL, the National Truckload Index for Linehaul, only is at $1.65 per mile. So $1.65 per mile. This is not including fuel. Now, why is this important? Because $1.65 for many carriers is their operating cost. And this means that those carriers are not turning a profit. They are breaking even. But for many smaller carriers, this is actually below operating costs, which means that they are running for a loss. Why am I showing you this? Because this is not sustainable, right? $1.65 is not sustainable, which means that we are going to start seeing more and more capacity exit the market. No one wants to operate for cost, and definitely no one wants to operate at a loss. So again, this means that capacity should start leaving the market more and more. All right, now let's look at some specifics, and we will start with flatbeds. Now, since Sonar does not provide detailed information for flatbeds, I went ahead and purchased a truck stop subscription that gave me access to this data, which is awesome. Now, this shows us, this is for all equipment types, but we're going to be focusing on the flatbed right here and flatbed right here. This chart shows us the number of loads picking up. This means what is the outbound volume like for flatbeds, whereas this chart is number of loads dropping off. How many trucks are delivering to that market area? So what we get is we get a good idea of the outbound loads versus the capacity in that market. And this is divided into zones. So first we have the northeastern states, and the only decent market in terms of head haul or in terms of how many loads there are versus trucks is Delaware. There are 225 loads and only 43 trucks going into that market. Everything else is pretty bad. I highlighted some things in red. Those are horrible market areas. Like, for example, New York has 401 loads currently and 1,277 flatbeds going into that market. Obviously, there's going to be overcapacity. Now, if we look at the southern states, we can see that this is the place to be if you have a flatbed. If it has a star, it's a good area. So we have Alabama, which has almost 6,000 loads and only 1,800 trucks going in. We have Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia and South Carolina. Georgia and South Carolina, the reason I didn't highlight them in green is because there's not much of a spread there, right? There are 3,034 trucks going in and only 3,700 loads going out. Now, for Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Arkansas, there is a big spread. Florida is horrible. There are 2,500 loads there and 4,000 some trucks there, over capacity. Tennessee, same thing, 2,300 something trucks and 1,482 loads. Not a good market. Now let's take a look at this. This is called the Plains states, right? And these are the states that are included. And pretty much there is no good market area here. Colorado is horrible, 439 loads and 1,400 some trucks going in. Kansas, same thing. Montana, clearly. Nebraska, New Mexico, Oklahoma, basically not a place to be if you have a flatbed. If we look at the western states, I was actually surprised. Arizona is horrible. 223 loads, 1,400 some trucks going in. Not a good place. But California, Nevada, and Oregon, even though it's nothing crazy, there are more loads than there are trucks if you look closely. This is interesting. I did not see that it translated into rates though, but I can tell you that at least from California, rates have gone up quite a bit since the last time we operated a flatbed, which was in December. Finally, we have Midwestern states. And again, I will attach these down below so you can check them out. But in terms of Midwestern states, Illinois is not a bad area, not much of a spread, but still. Minnesota, again, not much of a spread, but still more loads than there are trucks, and West Virginia. But in general, it looks like the southern states is where you want to be if you have a flatbed, because there are way more loads there than there are trucks going into those markets. I don't have experience with this. I will by next week, and I'll report back to you. All right, now on to dry vans. We're going to look at volumes first, and what we see here, the color represents whether volumes increased or dropped from last week. Red means there was a decrease in volume for dry vans in that market area. Blue means there was an increase. Now, the elevation of each market area shows the general volume from that area. So in general, this map is pretty red. Unfortunately, volumes are pretty much dropping everywhere. The only places they're really increasing is the El Paso area. There is Montana and Wyoming, places where there's usually not a lot of volume. Everywhere else, it's decreasing with some, random places, I suppose. The East Coast looks like it ran out of freight to move, and the West Coast looks like it's the same as it was last week. But of course, volumes just show us the demand side. So let's take a look at what is going on with tender rejections, which will show us which way the rates might go. And we can see there are a lot of bright red spots. Now, red again means a decrease in tender rejections. Blue means an increase, and the elevation is the general overview. So we can see that pretty much, it's red. The tender rejections are falling. There are some places like Wisconsin, Oklahoma. We have the North Platte, Nebraska market. We have parts of Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and of course the Seattle market. They did experience an increase. This part, Nevada, Southern California, Utah, Arizona, they also experienced an increase, but judging by the elevation of tender rejections, which means how many tender rejections happen there in general, I cannot say that the rates will be good here. So yeah, it seems like tender rejections for dry vans are being massacred at the moment. So where do you have to go if you have a dry van? So this map looks at both volume and rejections in an area. The bluer an area is, the more tender rejections, the higher it is, the more volume. And the goal is to go to a place where there is a ton of volume, so you have loads to choose from, and a high tender rejection index so that the rates are good. Now, I have included some numbers only for those market areas where the tender rejection index is over 10%. And it boils down to 3 market areas, unfortunately. We can see that the Nebraska area, the North Platte, Nebraska area, it has a rejection rate of 14%, but the volume is only 2.9. There are no loads there. Then we have the Wisconsin market, almost 11% rejection, and the volume is pretty good. And just like for the past 2 weeks or 3 weeks, Louisville, Kentucky, 10 or 11% rejection, and the volume is pretty good as well. But yeah, I can't say that there is much to choose from. But if we look at the big picture, we can see that the Midwest is pretty blue and it's pretty elevated. So that means that this is the place to be if you have a dry van. You definitely don't want to go to the West Coast, which is dead, or the Northeast, which is also dead. Finally, let's take a look at the head haul index, which shows us how many loads are going out of a market area compared to how many trucks are entering that market area, right? So red means overcapacity. It means that there are more trucks coming into that market than there are loads going out. Blue is the opposite. There are less trucks going in than loads going out. In general, I hope you can see this, the map is red, which means that across the board for dry vans, there is overcapacity. There are some areas, especially the Southeast, where it seems like you would have better negotiating power, maybe Pennsylvania, parts of Indiana. But in general, especially the West Coast, stay away from the West Coast. It's horrible. And the Northeast. The Midwest is a hit or miss, but we have to remember deadhead if you get into a market like Illinois, for example, which is pretty red. You can always deadhead to Indiana. If you end up somewhere here in Pennsylvania, you can deadhead to Ohio. So yeah, but in general, overcapacity galore. Now for reefer volumes. Again, red means the volumes decreased from last week. Blue means they increased. And in general, we can see that not much has changed from last week, except for certain market areas. Utah, Northern California, the Pendleton market, some places in the Southeast, North Dakota, Minnesota, those saw volume decreases. Whereas Arkansas, we can see North Platte, Nebraska, Georgia, basically some random spots saw a volume increase. But in general, not much has changed. It's a pretty boring map. Now, what about tender rejections? Well, we can see that the Midwest in general is seeing some positive changes in terms of tender rejections. They're increasing for the reefer, so that's good. Florida is seeing some more tender rejections, which is also promising. Don't expect great rates here. You can see how small, not elevated this is. That means that tender rejections are still really, really low, even though they have increased from last week. The Pacific Northwest is decreasing in terms of tender rejection rates. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Everything else is remaining the same. Pennsylvania, some increases, nothing crazy. So where do you have to go if you have a reefer? Well, just like with a dry van, I included only numbers for those market areas which have a tender rejection over 10%. And we can see, like for example, in North Dakota right here, the tender rejection is 20% almost, but the volume is so low that it's not even available on sonar. Same thing for the Cedar Rapids market, 20% rejection, volume is 0.43, which is horrid. Now in Fargo, North Dakota, you can maybe grab some opportunities. The tender rejection is good, the volume is there. Then we have the Omaha, Nebraska market, which is okay. We have the Iowa market, which is okay. And of course, the Quincy, Illinois market, but the volume again is very low. So I would say that Iowa, Omaha, and Fargo, North Dakota is the place to be to grab those opportunities if you have a reefer. But in general, it's the Midwest. Now let's take a look at the head haul index. So it's not as dire as the dry van map, which is good. We can see there's overcapacity right here in the southeast and eastern states. So I wouldn't go there. We can see there's overcapacity. Again, red means overcapacity. Blue means there are more outbound loads than inbound trucks. Seattle, not a good area. We can see just the Pendleton market is kind of dying. Central California is seeing more outbound loads than inbound trucks, which is good. But really, the Midwest is where it is. There are some red spots, of course, but this is the bluest it's going to get. So Midwest is still the best place for reefers for next week. So what about trucks in the market in general? Now, this map doesn't show us anything about capacity, but it does show us a ton about driver and carrier behavior. Where did trucks increase and where did they decrease since last week? Blue means an increase, red means a decrease. So what I can see right away is that a ton of capacity rushed into the California and Oregon and Nevada markets. And maybe it's because they were expecting those higher volumes due to produce, which unfortunately has yet to materialize because of the horrible weather. We can see that the South and the East also experienced a ton of capacity moving into these markets. Now in the Midwest, it's pretty red with some blue spots, obviously, but it seems like this is where truck capacity decreased, which means that the Midwest is still one of those places to be in next week in order to grab as many opportunities as possible. Now let's take a look at diesel prices. And unfortunately this time, I don't have the best news for you guys. So this chart shows us the diesel truck stop actual price per gallon. And it has been decreasing over a period of weeks and weeks and weeks. And now, as of the 27th, it's stabilized and now is increasing. Very, very slowly, but it is. It's at $4.28 per gallon. Now, if we look at this chart, this gives me a little bit more hope. We can see that it's still pretty much red. It shows us whether diesel prices increased or decreased since last week in different market areas. And we can see, again, they decreased pretty much everywhere except for Arizona, Virginia, Maryland, and Iowa. I'll be honest with you, this increase right here, it's making me a little bit nervous paired with the fact that load rates are decreasing. An increase in fuel prices, not the best thing to have right now. So this is what the market is doing. It is continuing to deteriorate. Now, for dry vans, it seems like they are taking a beating across the board. I get so many emails and comments with one question: when is this market going to get better? Here's my take. The market was supposed to start getting better because volumes were supposed to start increasing at the end of this month. Now, unfortunately, this has yet to happen because of the crazy weather we have been getting, which is delaying and muting the produce season. So because the volumes are not increasing, they are not pushing those rates up. To top it off, while capacity is leaving very, very slowly, That's the thing, it's leaving very slowly, so there is overcapacity across the board. The fact that the National Truckload Index for Linehaul only is at $1.65 per mile shows us that many carriers will be forced to shut down, because $1.65 is what it takes to break even for some, but for most smaller carriers, unfortunately, $1.65 per mile is operating at a loss. My experience this week, especially with dry vans, was so bad that it forced us to switch our trailers. Now, next week I will be releasing our performance for March, which is honestly a disgrace for this time of year, or actually any time of year, but I promised you guys transparency, so this is what I'm sticking to. Anyway, guys, I know that this was not the news anyone wants to hear, and I know we are all waiting for a turnaround in the market, but it looks like we'll have to practice some deep breathing and patience for a little bit longer. Stay safe, keep on fighting, and I will see you guys in the next video.